The Bible, possibly the most influential book ever written. But what if reading it through modern eyes means we're missing its true meaning entirely?
That's such an interesting point about how our modern perspective might be getting in the way. It's like trying to understand ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs without knowing their symbolic system.
Well, here's what's fascinating. The ancient Hebrews thought in completely concrete terms. When we read "God is my rock" today, we might think it's just poetic language. But for them, it was a visceral physical metaphor drawn from their daily experience in the desert.
So they weren't just being creative with their words. This was their actual way of processing and expressing ideas.
Exactly right. You know, studies of ancient Near Eastern languages show that abstract concepts were almost entirely expressed through physical metaphors. These people were nomads and farmers who lived incredibly close to the land.
That really changes how we should interpret these texts, doesn't it? I mean, when they talked about God as a shepherd, they weren't just picking a nice image.
Right. And here's what's really interesting. Archaeological evidence shows that about 80% of ancient Israelites were involved in agriculture or herding. So when they used these metaphors, they were drawing from their daily reality.
That makes me wonder about how this affected their understanding of more complex ideas. How did they express abstract concepts?
Well, research in cognitive linguistics shows that ancient Hebrew had roughly 8,700 root words, and nearly all of them were tied to concrete, physical actions or objects. When they needed to express abstract ideas, they built them from these tangible roots.
That's fascinating. Could you give some specific examples of how that worked?
So instead of saying someone was wise, they might say they had steady hands or walked straight paths. Studies of ancient Hebrew texts show they used about 3 times more action verbs than modern English translations do.
You know what this reminds me of? The way some indigenous cultures today still maintain very concrete ways of expressing complex ideas.
That's a great parallel. And linguistic anthropologists have found that cultures with concrete thought patterns often show stronger community bonds and more integrated worldviews. There's no separation between spiritual and physical reality.
So when modern readers try to impose our abstract thinking on these texts, we're really missing something essential.
Absolutely right. And here's something surprising. Studies of brain activity show that concrete language actually activates more areas of the brain than abstract language does. It creates stronger neural connections and better memory retention.
That really explains why these ancient texts have had such staying power. They're literally more memorable because of how they're written.
And what's fascinating is that recent research in educational psychology shows that concrete examples improve learning outcomes by up to 40% compared to abstract concepts. The ancient Hebrews were onto something powerful.
Well, that certainly puts a new perspective on biblical interpretation. How should this change the way people approach these texts today?
Think of it this way. When modern readers encounter a phrase like "the Lord is my shepherd," we should be thinking about what shepherding actually involved. Finding water, protecting from predators, treating injuries. It's not just a nice metaphor. It's a complete picture of care and protection.
That makes these ancient texts feel so much more immediate and relevant.
And here's what's really interesting. Cognitive scientists have found that when people engage with concrete metaphors, they show higher levels of emotional engagement and better retention of information. The ancient Hebrew way of thinking actually taps into how our brains work best.
So in a way, we're not just learning about ancient history, we're discovering a more effective way to understand complex ideas.
Exactly. And studies of traditional societies show that concrete thinking patterns are associated with stronger community bonds and more resilient social structures. The Hebrew approach wasn't just about communication. It was about building lasting connections.
That really brings us full circle to why this matters today, doesn't it?
It does. And here's the key takeaway. When we understand this concrete way of thinking, These ancient texts stop being distant historical documents and become practical guides for human experience. They speak to us in ways that are both profound and immediately applicable.
That's such a powerful way to think about it, making ancient wisdom accessible and relevant for today.
And that's really what makes this understanding so valuable. Recent studies in cognitive psychology suggest that concrete thinking patterns can lead to better decision-making and stronger emotional intelligence. The ancient Hebrews weren't just preserving their stories, they were encoding wisdom in the most effective way possible.